Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States, and your host. Excuse me, can't get this chair to scooch. It rolls backwards into these grooves. Anyway, I've been out. I've been actually on the East Coast in Florida speaking to homeschool groups. Had some great homeschool groups, classical conversation groups. And so I do have the update done. We're trying to figure out how and when to post it. We'll probably make it a benefit to join either Wild World of Politics Insider or Wild World of History VIP for a month or two, but it will be free eventually. At some point, probably before summer, it will be up free. I also have to make sure it doesn't conflict with the release of Patriot's History of Globalism. So remember, I'm trying to turn Patriots History into a film. We're making progress on that. 2 of the 3 scenes are done. We're about to move forward. We're going to need about $75,000. And that's what it'll take to film these 3 scenes that we will then take to Angel Studios, makers of The Chosen and Sound Freedom. So help us out. Go to Wild World of History, watch the trailer, and buy Larry a coffee. Okay. We are reading now in chapter 7, Red Foxes and Bear Flags. As always, I am in the 15th anniversary edition. If you're in an earlier edition, the page numbers won't line up and some of the headers won't line up, but I am starting on page 248 at the very last paragraph. A number of problems greeted the new president. This would be Martin Van Buren. Most notably, the depression still lingering from Van Buren's term. I'm sorry, this would be William Henry Harrison. Most notably, the depression still lingering from Van Buren's term. It had left the nation with a deficit of more than $11 million, a lot of money back then, which caused some in May 1841 special session of Congress to press for additional tariffs. Tyler resisted. He did side with the Whigs on the distribution of the monies from the sale of public lands and, in true Whig fashion, denounced the independent treasury as an unsatisfactory means of dealing with the economic distress. He wanted a Bank of the United States. Most stunning, this Virginian called for a new effort to suppress the slave trade. Clay, meanwhile, thinking that a Whig occupant of the White House equated with victory for his American system, immediately pushed for a new Bank of the United States. When a Whig, I'm sorry, I forgot to look ahead. We already killed off Harrison. This is Tyler. Sorry. Harrison died in the last episode. I forgot to do the quick recap. Harrison died in the last episode. His vice president, Tyler, assumed the presidency. So we're not talking about John Tyler now. All right, sorry. This is what happens when you're gone for a week. Clay, meanwhile, thinking that a Whig occupant of the White House equated with victory for his American system, immediately pushed for a new BUS. When a Whig bill for a new national bank came out of Congress in August 1841, however, Tyler vetoed it, as well as a second modified bill. Far from opposing a national bank, Tyler disliked some of the specific provisions regarding local lending by national bank branches, and he might have yielded to negotiations had not Clay, full of venom at the first veto, taken to the Senate floor to heap scorn on the president. Rumors swirled that the Whigs planned to spring a trap on Tyler by inserting phrases he would object to, then threatening to encourage the cabinet to resign if he dared veto the second bill. For a second time in 10 years, the National Bank had become the centerpiece in a political struggle largely removed from the specifics of the bill. By that time, the Whigs felt betrayed, although doubtless that some of the dissatisfaction originated with the Clay faction. Their protests were an astounding response by members of one party to their own president. It did not end with the bank bill either. Whigs and Tyler clashed again over the reduction in tariff rates. By that time, the tariffs existed almost exclusively for generating federal revenue. They were no longer protective by this time. They didn't protect steel or iron anymore. Any beneficial effects for the American industries, if ever existed at all, had disappeared by 1830, but the tariff still held great appeal for those industries that could keep prices high because of protection, and more important, to the politicians who had money to dole out to their constituents. It was that money in the early 1840s that was in danger of disappearing as the scheduled rate reductions already enacted drove the rates down from 33% to 20%. Consequently, two bills came out of the Whig Congress in 1842 to delay the reductions. And again, true to his earlier Democratic heritage, Tyler vetoed them both. With his shrinking constituencies about to abandon him, even to the point of suggesting impeachment, Tyler conceded on a third bill that delayed some of the tariff reductions, but at the same time ended plans to distribute federal revenues to the states. Tyler not only managed to make himself unpopular, but by forcing concessions, he also eliminated the few bones that the Whigs had hoped to throw to Southern interests. In response, the South abandoned the Whigs in the midterm elections, giving the House back to the Democrats. Tyler's bullheadedness in vetoing the bank bill sparked a rebellion in which his entire cabinet resigned. Not too good. The resulting gridlock proved problematic for American foreign policy. Tyler had navigated one rocky strait when Daniel Webster, prior to his resignation as Secretary of State, negotiated a treaty with the British in 1842 called the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. It settled a disputed Maine boundary with Canada, producing an agreement that gave 50% of the territory in question to the United States. He also literally dodged a bullet in early 1844 when, with Webster's replacement, Abel Upshur, and Senator Thomas Hart Benton, the president visited a new warship, the Princeton, with a massive new gun called the Peacemaker. Tyler was below decks during a ceremony when, during a demonstration, the gun misfired and the explosion killed Upshur, Tyler's servant, and several other people. Following Upshur's death, Tyler named John Calhoun as the Secretary of State. This placed a strong advocate of the expansion of slavery in the highest diplomatic position in government. It placed even greater emphasis on the events occurring on the southern border, where, following Mexican independence in 1821, large numbers of Americans had arrived. They soon led a new revolutionary movement in the northern province known as Texas. Okay, so we're on the next header now, which is on page 250. Empire of Liberty or Manifest Destiny. Hold on, let me make sure we don't have an update for you. I got to check. Okay, we are good. There's no new update that needs to be inserted here, so we're still going. So we're on page 250, Empire of Liberty or Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny, often ascribed to the so-called Age of Jackson, 1828 to 48, began much earlier when the first Europeans landed in the 16th and 17th century colonial frontier. Later, 18th century Americans fanned out onto the Trans-Appalachian West after the American Revolution, exploring and settling the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. It was from this perspective, then, that the Jacksonian Americans began to see and fulfill what they believed to be their destiny, to occupy all North American lands east and west of the Mississippi and Missouri River valleys. Thomas Jefferson had expounded upon a similar concept much earlier, referring to the Empire of Liberty that would stretch across the Indian lands into the Mississippi Valley. Jefferson, as has been noted, even planned for new territories and states with grandiose sounding names: Saratoga, Vandalia, Metropotamia, and so on. The sage of Monticello, that's Jefferson, always envisioned a nation with steadily expanding frontiers comprised of new farms and citizen farmers, bringing under its wings natives who could be civilized and acculturated to the Empire of Liberty. During the 1830s and 40s, the embers of Jackson's Empire of Liberty sparked into a new flame called Manifest Destiny. It swept over a nation of Americans whose eyes looked westward. The term itself came from an 1840s Democratic newspaper editorial supporting the Mexican-American War, in which the writer condemned individuals and nations who were, quote, hampering our, America's, power, limiting our progress, and checking the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions, unquote. Ralph Waldo Emerson's speech to the young American extolled the virtues of expansion, and John L. O'Sullivan agreed, yes, more, more, more. By the way, the fact that Emerson supported this is kind of interesting because he will oppose the Mexican War, which is, of course, one aspect of Manifest Destiny. Given that most of the expansionist talk revolved around Texas and points south, the popularization of Manifest Destiny to the press, to a certain extent, validated the abolitionist claim that a slave power conspiracy existed at the highest reaches of power. A majority of newspapers owe their existence to the Democratic Party. I went over this before, which in turn loyally supported the slave owners' agenda, if unwittingly. Even the Whig papers, such as Horace Greeley's Daily Tribune, which was anti-slavery, indirectly encouraged a Western exodus. Then as today, contemporaries frequently fretted about overpopulation. This is an ongoing thing. People are always, oh, we're overpopulated. We're not overpopulated. President James K. Polk, in his inaugural address in 1845, warned that the nation in the next decade would grow from 3 to 20 million, and obliquely noted that immigrants were pouring into our shores. There were other more common economic motives interwoven into the anxiety, because the Panic of 1837 created a class of impoverished individuals eager to seek new opportunities in the West. Yet many of these individuals were white Missourians, not slaveholders, who headed for the Pacific Northwest, where they aimed to escape the South's slave-based cotton economy and the slave masters who controlled it. There's a great clash in the South between the yeoman farmers, those who don't own slaves, and the slave owners, although in the Civil War they would all fight together. Complex economic motives constituted only one voice in the choir calling for Manifest Destiny. Religion played an enormous factor in the westward surge, as a Great Awakening enthusiasm prompted a desire to expunge Spanish Catholicism, spread Protestantism, and convert the Indians. Other than California, if any one area captured the imagination of American vagabonds and settlers, it was Texas. Before Mexican independence, Texas had failed to attract settlers from Spain and subsequently proved difficult to secure against Indian raids. Since few Mexicans would settle in Texas, the Spanish government sought to entice American colonists through generous land grants. Moses Austin had negotiated for the original grant, but it was his son, Stephen F. Austin, who planted the settlement in 1822 after Mexico won independence from Spain. By 1831, 8,000 Texan American farmers and their 1,000 slaves worked the cotton fields of the Brazos and Colorado River valleys near modern-day Houston. Although the Mexican government originally welcomed these settlers in hopes they would make the new colony prosperous, the relationship soured. Settlers accepted certain conditions when they arrived, including converting to Catholicism, conducting all official business in Spanish, and refraining from settling within 60 miles of the American border. These constraints, the Mexican government thought, would ensure that Texas became integrated into Mexico. However, few Protestant or atheist Texans converted to Catholicism. Virtually no one spoke Spanish, even in official exchanges, and many of the new settlers owned slaves. The Republic of Mexico had eliminated slavery in the rest of the country, but had ignored the arrival of American slaveholders in Texas. With the Mexican Colonization Act of 1830, however, the government of Mexico prohibited further American settlement and banned slavery in the northern provinces, specifically aiming the ordinance at Texas. These disputes all led to the 1830 formation of a Texan American independence movement, which claimed its rights under the Mexican Constitution of 1824. That's why if you see the movies and the pictures of the Alamo, the Mexican flag that's flying there doesn't have the eagle on it. It has the numbers 1824, referring to we're fighting for the 1824 Constitution. When Texans challenged Mexican authority, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna marched north from Mexico City in 1836. His massive column, which he quickly divided, numbered 6,000 troops, some of whom he dispatched under General Jose de Urrea to move up the coast and mop up small pockets of resistance. Urrea surrounded Colonel James Fannon's troops in their retreat from Goliad and convinced Fannin to surrender. The prisoners were marched back to Goliad, where they were joined with other groups swept up by Uriah's troops and were brutally executed by orders from Santa Anna himself. Meanwhile, Santa Anna led his main column to San Antonio to confront the forces gathered at the mission known as the Alamo, an adobe mission turned fort. As he laid siege to the Alamo on March 2, 1836, the Texans issued a Declaration of Independence, founding the Republic of Texas. Sam Houston, an 1832 immigrant from Tennessee, was elected president of the Lone Star Republic and subsequently the general of the Texan Army. At the Alamo, a legend was being born. Opposing Santa Anna's 4,000-man army was the famed 187-man Texan garrison led by Colonel William B. Travis, and including the already famous Jim Bowie and David Crockett. Quote, "Let's make their victory worse than a defeat," Travis implored his doomed men, who sold their lives dearly. It took Santa Anna more than a week to bring up his long column, and his cannons pummeled the Alamo the entire time. Once arrayed, the whole Mexican army attacked early in the morning on March 6th, following a long silence that sent many of the lookouts and pickets to sleep. Mexicans were at or even over the north wall before the first alarms were raised. The first attack by conscripts was repulsed, and then a second attack repelled in hand-to-hand fighting. Santa Anna sent in his reserves after a lull, attacking the north and south walls simultaneously, and vastly outnumbered Texans, having spent much of their ammunition, were overwhelmed. Crockett, one of the last survivors, found amid a stack of Mexican bodies, was shot by a firing squad later that day. "Remember the Alamo" became a battle cry of Houston's freedom fighters. The Generalissimo had won a costly victory, whereas the Texans staged a retreat that at times bordered on a rout. Only Houston's firm hand, Washington-like in some respects, kept any semblance of order. Unknown to him, Santa Anna had sustained substantial losses, taking an insignificant fort. Some estimate his assault on the Alamo left 500 dead outside the walls, reducing his force from 1/4 to 1/3 after accounting for the wounded and the pack trains needed to deal with them. If he won the Alamo, he soon lost the war. Pursuing Houston, Santa Anna continued to divide his weary and wounded force. Houston, convinced he had lured the enemy on long enough, staged a counterattack on April 21, 1836, at San Jacinto, near Galveston Bay, ordering his men to, quote, "Hold your fire, God damn you, hold your fire." He approached the larger Mexican force in the open, struggling to push two cannons called the Twin Sisters up a ridge overlooking the Mexican positions. Even though Santa Anna had pickets posted and saw the Texans draw up in the open field, he did not think they would attack. Houston's men charged and routed Santa Anna, who was seen running about in the utmost excitement, wringing his hands and unable to give an order. When Texans screamed out the phrases, "Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad," the Mexican forces broke and ran. Santa Anna escaped temporarily, disguised as a servant. His capture was important in order to have the president's signature on a treaty acknowledging Texan independence, and the general was apprehended before long with 730 of his troops, who acknowledged him as El Generalissimo, so he couldn't duck it, right? Texan casualties totaled 9 killed, whereas the Mexicans lost 630. This is on top of the 500 they lost at the Alamo. In return for his freedom and that of his troops, Santa Anna agreed to cede all of Texas to the new republic, but repudiated that agreement as soon as he was released. He returned to Mexico City and plotted revenge. Meanwhile, the government of the Texas Republic officially requested to join the United States of America. The request by Texas brought to the surface the very tensions over slavery that Van Buren had sought to repress and avoid. In the House of Representatives, John Quincy Adams, who had returned to Washington after being elected a Massachusetts congressman, he and Andrew Johnson, a senator, were the only former presidents ever to return to Washington in a lower position. Adams filibustered the bill for 3 weeks. Van Buren opposed annexation, the Senate rejected a ratification treaty, and Texas remained an independent republic sandwiched between Mexico and America. two things. This is the only independent republic to come into the United States. Most states, as you know, came in under the territorial system. California would be slightly different, of course, in the Mexican War. The other thing is, if you watch the 1960s John Wayne version of the Alamo, which isn't too accurate toward the end, Davy Crockett did not blow himself up in the powder magazine, for example. But at any rate, Sam Houston in that movie is played by actor Richard Boone, a very gruff sounding guy who played on a long-term basis in a series on television called Have Gun, Will Travel. And his name was Paladin, and he was a mercenary gunfighter who traveled around for pay, right? Well, it turns out that Boone was filming Have Gun Will Travel in Arizona at my father's ranch, my father's barn. And we were invited down to watch the scene in which he fought some other guy in a fist fight. And when he was done, he came over and shook my hand and gave me a little Have Gun Will Travel Wire Paladin San Francisco business card autographed. So that was pretty cool. All right, I will see you guys back here Monday. Don't forget Patriot's History of Globalism is coming out on February 20th. Pre-order now. You're going to want it. Make sure you're a subscriber to the Wild World of History VIP. Tons and tons of stuff there. Probably another 40 or 50 hours of videos there on all sorts of things, from the Crusades to Prohibition to Kennedy to World War II, whatever you want. So take a look at that. And if you want more political commentary, go over to the Wild World of Politics and the Insider. I do a 15 to 20 minute political commentary every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the latest topics: polling, elections, primaries, whatever's happening in the cities, the illegal immigrant crisis. Check it out. And I will see you guys back here on Monday.